Welcome back to a new episode about how we could show data from our database using MySQL. In the previous episode, we created our database connection and we required the connection inside our index.php. So let me show it to you right here. And this is the connection that we created. So with the variable con that we created, we can go inside our database and write down the data inside our web page. So let's go to our index.php and let's remove variable con. Let's create opening and closing PHP tags. And let's start creating our connection. So the first thing that I want to do is that I want to select all the data using an SQL statement. So let's create a new variable called SQL and set it equal, to double quotes and a semicolon. By now, you must know what a select query is. So let's write it down. Inside our double quotes, let's say that we want to select star, so everything, from the table's users that we created in the introduction to database sections. Now that we have the SQL query that we want, we need to get inside of our database to perform the query. This is also called querying. And the way you do this is, let's go one line below. And let's create a new variable called result. And let's set it equal to a MySQL function. So MySQL underscore query. And the MySQL query takes two params. So the first one is the connection. And in our case, it's con, because we can actually access it. And the second one is the query that you actually want to perform. And in our case, it's variable SQL. Now, what will happen is that the results will be fetched. And what we want to do is to print it out on our website. Before we actually want to print something out, I want to do a check if we are actually getting something back. And if we do not, we want something to be printed out. So let's go one line below. Let's create a new variable called row count and set it equal to MySQL underscore num underscore rows. And this function returns the number of rows in a result set. And it takes one param, and that's what we actually want to check. And in our case, we want to check variable result. So let's go one line below. And right here, we want to create an if statement. And we want to check if we have more than one line. Because if that is true, the database is returning something, and that's actually what we want. So in our if statement, the condition needs to be that if row count is greater than 0, do something. So let's go inside our if loop. We're selecting everything right now with the star sign. So we need to create a while loop inside our if statement that keeps printing everything out as long as it's getting back results. But before we continue on, let's create an else statement and let's echo out no results found. So let's go right back inside of our condition of the while loop. And we need to create a new variable called row. And let's set it equal to a new function called MySQL underscore fetch underscore assoc. And what this function does is it returns an associative array that corresponds to the fetched row until there are no more rows left. So it takes one param because, we're not fetching anything right now. And that's the variable result because that's what we actually want to fetch. So let's go inside our while loop. This might be a little bit too much for now because, you're learning all these new functions. So let me explain to you what we're doing. So we created a query, select all from users, and we called it SQL. Then we created a new query called results that will check if the query can be performed in the database. We created a new variable called row count, and that will count the rows that we're getting back from variable result, as you can see in the param. So if the amount of row count is higher than 0, what we're doing in our if statements, then we want to loop through the data and print everything out as an associative array. And since it's an array, we need to echo it out like an array. So let's do that. So let's say echo variable row, because we're setting it equal to the fetched results, brackets, semicolon. So inside our brackets, we need to specify the column that we want to print. So remember, we had an ID, a username, and a password. So let's say that we want to echo out username. Well, let's also add a break. Let's save it. Let's refresh the browser. And you can see all the names that we have in our database on our screen. And let me show you my local host real quick, because, well, you must have the same information on your screen. Let me zoom out. Let's enter PHP tutorial, table users. And you can see that we have Dari 06, 08, 10, Jack, David, Michael, and John. And if I close it, you can see that the same names are printed out on my screen. And you can even echo out the password. So let's echo out username, punctuation mark, row, brackets, and we want the password. So let's save it, refresh it, and you can see that all the passwords are printed out. But that's not what we want right now. The problem right now is that, well, we're selecting everything. But what we can do is to go after users and create a condition. And let's say that we want to select everything from users where the ID is equal to 1. Save it, refresh the browser, and the output is Dari 06. And remember that we deleted ID number 2, so let's try to print it out. And we have no results. And this is why I like the else statement, because, well, if I remove it, save it, refresh it, nothing's happening. So you don't know what the problem actually is. Since we have our query in our index.php right now, let's go back to the database and let's write a typo in our DB name. Save it, refresh the browser, and you can see that, well, database connection failed. So you know what the problem is right here, because we made a typo right here. So thank you for watching this episode, and I will be seeing you in the next one.